Everyone knows that in 1492, Columbus sailed to what we now call America. And everyone agrees that the 4 voyages of discovery irreversibly changed the course of history. But that's just about where agreement on Columbus ends. The history of Columbus is hard to piece together and even harder to evaluate. And drawing an accurate profile of the man has been made even more difficult by the numerous myths that surround him. For example, one of the best-known stories about Columbus is that Isabella, Queen of Spain, pawned her crown jewels to finance Columbus's voyage. That never happened. Isabella may have offered to pawn her jewels. Scholars are not certain, but even if she did, it was not necessary. The first voyage of Columbus was financed from private sources and by juggling the royal finances. A second myth: the crew of Columbus's first voyage was composed mainly of criminals. In fact, of the 90 men aboard the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria, just 4 were criminals, and they happened to be experienced seamen. One of those 4 had killed a man in a fight and had been sentenced to death. The other 3 rescued the condemned man from jail, a crime for which they too received the death sentence. While at large, the 4 took advantage of a royal decree pardoning anyone who would sail with Columbus. According to Samuel Eliot Morison, author of Admiral of the Ocean Sea, the preeminent biography of Columbus, the royal order suspending all civil and criminal processes against men who signed on with Columbus gave rise to the notion, repeated ad nauseum, that Columbus's crew were composed of desperate characters, criminals, and jailbirds. Even these 4 were not in the ordinary sense jailbirds, and at least 3 of them made good. Yet another myth. Columbus spent 6 or 7 years in Spain trying to get royal sponsorship for his voyage. During that time, the myth goes, he was the target of the jests and pointed remarks of those who did not believe his voyage was possible. Columbus, it is popularly believed, argued that the world was round, while those who opposed his voyage thought it was flat. This myth derives from Washington Irving's enormously popular 1828 biography, The Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus. Irving creates a vivid scene of an obscure navigator facing a royal commission of scholars and theologians in Salamanca, Spain, convened to judge his proposal for a voyage of discovery. Columbus argued his case but was turned down, largely because he could not convince his distinguished panel that the world was round. Well, there are at least 3 major problems with Irving's story. First, by the time Columbus arrived in Spain, he was no obscure navigator. Second, although a commission had been convened to study Columbus's proposal, the meeting Irving described never took place. Third, no educated person in the 15th century believed the world was flat. All, including the members of the commission, knew very well the world was round. As Morison put it, Irving's story was pure moonshine and mischievous nonsense. But that did not stop it from being retold in textbooks and encyclopedias even to the present day. Myths like these obscure our understanding of Columbus's life, but they are relatively minor compared to the larger issues. Was Columbus a discoverer or a conqueror? A rationalist or a mystic? A capitalist or a visionary? Was he supremely arrogant or motivated by a noble cause? Or was he just the luckiest man in history, a hard-headed sailor who stumbled across America? Or was he divinely guided? Did he inaugurate an age of progress and enlightenment? Or did he unleash destructive forces that now threaten the survival of Earth? To separate the man from the myth, we must first define the man. What made him, what he tried to do, what he actually accomplished. And this is where our troubles begin. Because Columbus, to borrow a line from Winston Churchill, is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Maybe he planned it that way. Scholars, historians, and writers of varying degrees of skill and objectivity have argued that Columbus was Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Scandinavian, Swiss, Greek, Catalonian, Armenian, Russian, Majorcan, Basque, Croatian, and even Chinese. Some say he was a Spanish Jew, or that he came from a family of conversos, Jews who converted to Catholicism. Still others say he was a French pirate in the service of René d'Anjou, or a spy for King John II of Portugal, or even an agent of a secret society guarding the descendants of Jesus. More than 250 scholarly books and articles have been written on the origins of Columbus, but no one knows for certain where Columbus was born or his date of birth. No one even knows exactly what he looked like. Fernando said his father was a well-built man of more than average stature, the face long, the cheeks somewhat high, his body neither fat nor lean. He had an aquiline nose and light-colored eyes. His complexion was light and tending to bright red. In youth, his hair was blonde, but when he reached the age of 30, it all turned white. Other reports by his contemporaries agree, but no one painted a portrait of Columbus during his life. Most scholars are certain Columbus came from Genoa. There is good evidence to support this case, but not good enough to lay the other claims to rest. The Columbus came from Genoa theory is the basis for the standard Columbus biography. It goes like this. The man we know as Christopher Columbus was born Cristoforo Colombo in Genoa in 1451. Scholars working from notarized legal documents have concluded that he was born sometime between August 25th and October 31st. His father, Domenico, was a wool weaver, and his mother, Susanna, was the daughter of a wool weaver. Columbus was the eldest of 5 children. One brother, Bartholomew, became an active collaborator with him in all his projects. Another brother, Diego, sailed with Columbus on his second voyage and helped govern the island of Hispaniola. Christopher became a wool worker and worked in his father's shop, but he also began sailing when he was young. How young, we do not know. Columbus wrote that he went to sea at a tender age, but doesn't give the age. Fernando says he was 14. Yet it is not clear how he divided his time between sailing and woolworking. When Columbus was about 21 years old, he still described himself as a wool worker, not as a sailor. But within 2 decades, about half of which he spent on land, he had become one of the greatest mariners of all time. Columbus had little or no formal education. Scholars suppose that whatever education he received was at a primitive school set up by Genoese wool workers. But Columbus was very well educated. He was well read, a prolific letter writer, and an engaging and persuasive speaker. By the time he was 30, he had become a merchant, a bookseller, and a map maker. Genoa is located on the Mediterranean Sea in Italy. In the time of Columbus, it was an independent city-state. It was a maritime power and was becoming a metropolis of European capitalism. Genoa sent ships throughout the Mediterranean to trade. It had established an economic empire. According to the standard biography, Columbus was typically Genoese, steeped in both the lore of the sea and in commerce. The sea obviously played a big role in Columbus's life. His early voyages were probably brief coastal trading excursions. In 1474 or 1475, Columbus made a longer voyage to Chios, an island in the Aegean Sea under Genoese control. In 1476, Columbus moved to Portugal, where he lived for 7 or 8 years. In Portugal, Columbus made a series of voyages that gave him vital sailing experience. Between 1476 and 1477, Columbus sailed to England, Ireland, and even to Iceland. In 1478, he went on a sugar buying trip from Lisbon to Madeira, an island 560 miles from Portugal off the coast of Africa. And sometime between 1481 and 1484, Columbus sailed once, perhaps twice, to Guinea on the coast of Africa, where Portugal had a trading post. In 1478 or 1479, Columbus married Filipa Perestreo Moines, a Portuguese noblewoman. Their son, Diego, was born in 1480. While in Portugal, Columbus conceived of his great enterprise. In the traditional telling of the story, Columbus in Portugal is Act 1 of the drama. It sets the stage for his dramatic encounters in Spain. In this act, waiting and ridicule were followed by rejection, and finally, perhaps miraculously, sponsorship by Ferdinand and Isabella. And then Columbus was off on the voyage that would change the course of history. This period where a heroic figure triumphs over adversity and delay is reminiscent of the patriarchal narratives in the Old Testament. As Las Casas put it, once Columbus arrived in Spain, he began his own terrible, continuous, painful, and tedious battle, perhaps harsher and more horrible than a fight with material weapons, to inform the many people who, presuming to understand, did not in fact understand him at all, and to answer and tolerate the many who ignored and shunned his person, insulting him with words which pained him very much. As the curtain goes up on 1485, Columbus has just arrived with his son Diego in Palos, Spain, a seaport town 30 miles from the Portuguese border. His first stop, the Franciscan monastery at La Rábida. This is one of the most poignant scenes in the standard biography. Columbus was low on funds. His possessions were not much more than a vision and the will to pursue it. According to Dorner, historians give us a picture of the discoverer and his son as wanderers finally run aground at the monastery door, throwing themselves on the charity of the Franciscans. It is a powerful picture. We can look at the same stone entranceway and imagine a tired man and boy striking an oak door with an iron knocker. It was a pivotal and emblematic moment, one that has become a part of Colombian iconography. End of quote. According to the standard biography, the arrival of Columbus at La Rábida was one of the key events that led to the discovery. La Rábida was the solution to a problem. What would Columbus do with Diego when he pursued his enterprise? La Rábida had the equivalent of a boarding school, but of far greater importance. Columbus met Father Antonio de Marchena. Marchena was an astronomer and cosmographer, as well as the administrator of the Franciscan sub-province of Seville. During his stay at La Rábida, Columbus took Marchena into his confidence and told him of his plans. Marchena became his advocate and more. According to Taviana, Marchena became the spiritual father, the guardian angel to the future discoverer during the 7 difficult years Columbus spent in Spain. Columbus ran into plenty of skeptics in Spain, but through Marchena he gained some powerful friends in financial and political circles. Marchena helped him get in touch with the Duke of Medina Sidonia, the wealthiest man in Spain. The Duke seriously considered equipping a small fleet for Columbus, but a dispute forced the Duke to leave Seville, and negotiations with Columbus were broken off. On the other hand, the Duke of Medina Celi offered to finance Columbus's enterprise. There is disagreement among scholars as to how Columbus first came to the attention of Ferdinand and Isabella. According to Taviani, Father Marchena used the vast network of the powerful Franciscan order to open many heavy doors of the royal court to the Genoese sailor. On January 20, 1486, Ferdinand and Isabella received Columbus in a town not far from Madrid. Morrison has a different account. The way he tells it, the Duke of Medina Celi thought he should first check with Isabella before financing Columbus's enterprise. And she thought such an enterprise should be undertaken by the crown, and ordered Columbus to come to court. What happened after that depends on who is telling the story. According to Taviani, Columbus presented his plan with the fervor and faith of a convert in the tones of a man possessed of the truth. He used a map of the world to back up his arguments, and in February of 1486, Father Marchena appeared before the monarchs to say that what Columbus had told them was the truth. But Ferdinand and Isabella did not believe Columbus. They had appointed a committee to study the navigator's plan, and their verdict was, the enterprise simply would not work. Morrison has a different sequence of events. He says that Columbus arrived in the royal city of Cordova on January 20, 1486. The same day, Taviani says that Columbus was received by Ferdinand and Isabella near Madrid. But Morrison said that Columbus missed the king and queen who constantly moved their court from city to city. And even though Columbus was unable to make personal contact with the sovereigns, he always regarded himself in their service from the day of his arrival. According to Morrison, the first meeting between Columbus and Ferdinand and Isabella did not take place until April of 1486. Despite the discrepancies in dates and places, Morrison, Taviani, and others tell essentially the same story. Columbus endured years of waiting as events beyond his control delayed and nearly destroyed his enterprise. Columbus faced two problems: war and committees. The war grew out of Ferdinand and Isabella's efforts to create a unified Spain. In the 15th century, Spain was made up of 6 medieval monarchies: Aragon, Castile, Catalonia, Granada, Navarre, and Valencia. Aragon and Castile were the largest and most powerful. Early in the 14th century, the brother of the King of Castile was elected King of Aragon, Catalonia, and Valencia, and his descendants inherited the Kingdom of Navarre. 5 of the 6 kingdoms were tenuously united in 1469, when Ferdinand, the Prince of Aragon, married Isabella, the Princess of Castile. This was a de facto union, with each kingdom keeping its own laws, customs, and language. But it formed the nucleus of modern Spain. Dorner points out that Ferdinand and Isabella were engaged in the creation of a modern nation-state, but they were doing the job without recourse to modern means of communication. Thus, they were constantly on the move, traveling from city to city to establish their authority in each region. They were also determined to conquer the 6th monarchy, the Moorish kingdom of Granada. Granada was the last remnant of Muslim power on the Iberian Peninsula. So when Columbus arrived in Spain in 1485, Ferdinand and Isabella were preoccupied with a protracted war to force the Moors out of Granada. According to Morrison, Columbus first spoke to Isabella on or about May 1, 1486. She listened graciously as he explained his enterprise, but she turned the matter over to a committee for study. It was organized by the Queen's confessor, Hernando de Talavera. The committee did not think much of Columbus's proposal. In 1515, a city councilor testified that he was present when the committee discussed the enterprise, and that all of them agreed that what the admiral said could not possibly be true, and that contrary to what appeared to most of them, the admiral persisted. Morrison said that the thing that could not possibly be true was Columbus's theory of a narrow ocean between Spain and the Indies. Nevertheless, the commission postponed rendering a report. Sometime in 1486, Columbus met a young peasant girl named Beatriz Enriquez de Arana. She became his mistress, and in August 1488, the mother of his second son, Fernando. Columbus never married Beatriz, but he had Fernando legitimized and educated in the court of Castile. Fernando became a scholar and Columbus's first biographer. In 1488, the Talavera Committee still had not given its report, and Columbus was starting to lose his patience. He wrote a letter to John of Portugal. The king wrote a gracious reply calling Columbus our special friend and inviting him to Lisbon. "We will have great need of your ability and fine talent," wrote the king. It is not clear what happened while Columbus was in Portugal, but he was in Lisbon in December 1488 when Bartholomew Diaz returned from an important voyage of exploration. Diaz had sailed around the Cape of Good Hope. According to Morrison, now that Africa had been circumnavigated and the eastern sea route to India was open, the King of Portugal had no more use for Columbus, who returned to Spain. In 1489, Columbus was apparently back in Spain. Morrison said that Columbus was waiting, hoping, and praying for a favorable report from the Talavera Committee and for a swift conclusion of the campaign against Granada. In 1486, the Queen put Columbus on the royal payroll. His stipends were meager and came to an end in 1488. Morrison thinks Columbus may have sold books and maps to support himself. Taviani argues that in 1489, Columbus was discouraged and was thinking of taking his enterprise to France. It was now going on 3 years, and the Talavera Commission still had not given its final report. Wrote Las Casas, "All this procrastination caused Columbus much anguish and bitterness. He saw his life being spent in vain. He found himself lacking in the necessary things without which life at court is intolerable, and little less than death itself. But above all, he suffered because they doubted both his words and his person, and this to a generous man is equivalent to death in pain and abomination." End of quote. We are still looking at the standard biography at this point. According to Taviani, Columbus bared his soul to Father Marchena, who put Columbus in touch with the Duke of Medina Sidonia and then the Duke of Medina Celi. The Duke of Medina Celi decided to finance the enterprise, but thought it prudent to check with the Queen first. Sound familiar? It's the same story Morrison told, but Morrison placed it several years earlier. If nothing else, this points out how difficult it is to pin down what Columbus really was doing before 1492. In any case, Taviani says the Queen invited Columbus to see her. She gave him positive hopes that when the business of Granada was settled, his problems would be resolved. Late in 1490, the commission finally rendered its verdict. It was negative. According to both Ferdinand and Las Casas, the commission gave 6 arguments to prove the enterprise would not work. These included the assertions that a voyage to Asia would take 3 years, that the Atlantic Ocean was infinite and perhaps unnavigable, that if Columbus did reach the other side of the globe, he might not be able to get back, and that there might not be land there because St. Augustine had said that that part of the globe was covered with water. So much for St. Augustine. Ferdinand and Isabella did not accept or reject the report. They said they would reconsider the enterprise when the war with Granada was over. Columbus waited another 6 to 9 months. By then, he was fed up with Castilian procrastination. In the summer of 1491, he decided to leave Spain for France. He went to La Rábida to get Diego. There, through Father Marchena, he met Father Juan Perez. Perez had been the Queen's confessor. He promised to get Columbus another audience with her. Isabella told Perez she had not forgotten Columbus and summoned him back to court. She also sent him money for new clothes. Once again, Columbus appeared before the Queen, and once again the enterprise was back in the hands of a committee. This was an ad hoc committee that included mariners and astronomers. Their job was to determine the technical feasibility of Columbus's plan. After they reported their findings, the enterprise was turned over to yet another committee, the Royal Council of Castile. It was made up of the highest level nobles, ecclesiastics, and was summoned to give a definitive opinion. At this point, Columbus, being a religious man, was probably thinking, "For the Lord so loved the world, he did not send a committee." The Royal Council probably reviewed the technical aspects of the enterprise. Morrison says the enterprise was rejected again, but not on technical grounds. It was probably rejected because of the enormous price Columbus demanded in honors, titles, and revenues as a reward for success. This suggests that the enterprise was approved by the special committee and rejected by the Royal Council. What Columbus demanded was nothing short of astonishing. He wanted the king and queen to appoint him to the offices of both admiral and viceroy over the lands he would discover for Ferdinand and Isabella, having the same rights and privileges as the Admiral of Castile. Furthermore, he wanted the admiralty and the viceroyship to be hereditary titles to his sons and all future generations. He demanded that he be made a member of the nobility and receive 10% of all of the revenue that Ferdinand and Isabella earned from his enterprise, including gold, pearls, gems, and spices. Beyond that, he wanted the right to finance up to 8% of the cost of the enterprise and to receive 8% of the profits. Why did Columbus ask for so much? Morrison says one may speculate endlessly about this question. He suggests Columbus was under a sense of outrage over the 6 wasted years in Spain. On 1,000 occasions he had smarted under the insults which a somebody with no brains could inflict with impunity on a nobody with an idea. Columbus resented this treatment all his life and frequently adverted to it bitterly. So, thought he, if these proud Castilians want my services after all, they will have to pay through the nose. God take them. Well, I don't really subscribe to this notion of Columbus's resentment, etc., all of these years. And this is still part of the official biographies. On January 2, 1492, Granada capitulated. It was a joyous occasion. Columbus marched in the procession as Ferdinand and Isabella entered what had been the last Muslim stronghold in Catholic Spain. Columbus expected the sovereigns to finally approve his project. But according to Morrison, within a matter of days, Columbus was informed that his enterprise was absolutely and definitely rejected. The sovereigns confirmed this at an audience which they meant to be final and in which they wished him bon voyage. He departed Santa Fe for Paulos and intended to sail for France. But at the last moment, Luis de Santángel, King Ferdinand's Minister of Finance, stepped in and persuaded Queen Isabella to support the enterprise. The essence of his argument: why risk losing so much when there is the potential for so much gain? In service to God and the exaltation of his church, not to speak of great increase and glory for her realms and crown. And if money was the issue, he would finance the fleet himself. Santangel's speech had the desired effect. The Queen decided to reconsider. Wrote Taviani, "The sudden reversal of fortunes was so rapid and dramatic as to border on the theatrical. Columbus was on his way to the seaport when a royal messenger overtook him and ordered him to come back. Juan Perez, acting as Columbus's attorney, negotiated 2 contracts with Ferdinand and Isabella. These 2 agreements, called the capitulations and titles, were signed in April 1492. They legally provided for all that Columbus had asked for. Years of testing had finally come to an end. The enterprise was about to become a reality. On August 3rd, 1492, Columbus sailed out of Palos on a journey that would change the course of history. His fleet consisted of 3 ships, 2 caravels, the Pinta and the Niña, and 1 now, the Santa Maria. These are no doubt the world's best-known ships, but we know very little about them. Scholars even have to guess at their size. According to one estimate, the Niña was 67 feet long and 21 feet wide at its beam, or widest. The Pinta was slightly larger, about 70 feet long and 22 feet at the beam. And the Santa Maria was about 77 feet long and 26 feet at the beam. They carried a combined crew of 90 men. What we know of the journey comes mostly from the log Columbus kept during the voyage. The original log and a copy have been lost. Las Casas, probably working from a copy or a copy of a copy, made an abstract of the log. About 15% of the log is thought to be Columbus's own words. On August 12, 1492, Columbus arrived at the Canaries. Here he modified and repaired his ships. The Canaries were close to the same latitude as the islands he would discover, and an ideal place to pick up the trade winds that would carry him west. According to William and Carla Phillips, Columbus chose a nearly perfect trajectory across the Atlantic, dropping down to the Canary Islands before heading due west. This is still the preferred sailing route from southern Europe to the Caribbean. Columbus's choice of the Canaries as the starting point for the Atlantic crossing was either his greatest stroke of luck or the proof of his genius as a mariner. On September 6, the fleet departed the Canaries and made a beeline for the Bahamas. The 33-day voyage was uneventful. With blue skies, calm seas, and the wind to their backs, the sailing was easy. Columbus's biggest problem was his crew. They were clearly nervous, ironically due to the favorable winds that pushed them constantly west. They wondered how they could ever sail home. An entry on the log for September 22nd noted, "My people were very worked up, thinking that these sea winds for returning to Spain did not blow." By October 10, the crew was unhappy and possibly close to mutiny. The log for that day reads, "Here the men could no longer stand it. They complained of the long voyage." But the admiral encouraged them the best he could, giving them good hope of the benefits that they would be able to secure. And he added that it was useless to complain, since he had come to find the Indies and thus had to continue the voyage until he found them, with the help of our Lord. Late the night of October 11, Columbus saw a light or a fire which he believed was on land. And at 2 a.m. on the morning of October 12, they spotted a sandy beach in the moonlight. What a thrill. When the sun came up, Columbus and his crew saw a gathering of naked people. Columbus went ashore with a landing party and formally took possession of the island for Ferdinand and Isabella. He named the island San Salvador in honor of our Savior. It is not clear from the log where Columbus first landed. Part of the problem is that Las Casas, who was not a sailor, often did not understand nautical terminology. When he abstracted the log, he inadvertently changed the meaning of a number of the entries. As a result, there has been extensive controversy about where Columbus first discovered land. The leading choices are Watling Island, Samana Kai, and Grand Turk Island, but no one knows for certain where Columbus first set his foot in the New World. It is unlikely that the controversy will ever be settled. Where Columbus first set foot in the New World. Columbus had immediate interaction with the people of the islands, whom he eventually called Indians. They were Taino Indians who were part of the Arawak language group. He was able to interact with them and later trade with them by giving them bells, lace points, glass beads, and other trinkets. These were considered to be of little value in Spain. On other islands, he eventually received gold jewelry in return. According to the standard biography, Columbus believed that before long he would find rich Asian ports. Columbus left San Salvador on October 14. He took 7 Indians as guides and interpreters. According to William and Carla Phillips, he planned to take the islanders back to Spain, where they could be converted to Christianity and taught the Castilian language before returning with subsequent expeditions as interpreters. In this plan, Columbus was following the model that Franciscan missionaries had pioneered in the Canaries and that Portuguese were continuing to use in Africa. The captured islanders would also serve as proof of his reaching a distant land with exotic peoples. Columbus clearly intended to treat his captives well, but he never seemed to doubt that he had the right to hold them against their will. Columbus sailed to other islands, claiming them for Ferdinand and Isabella and naming them as he went. The 2 largest he claimed were Cuba and Hispaniola, which is the island where modern Haiti and the Dominican Republic are located. When Columbus first set sail for Cuba, he thought, based on the reports of Indians, that it must be Japan. He was hopeful of finding the mainland of the Indies so he could pay a visit to the Great Khan. On Christmas Eve, 1492, Columbus lost his flagship, the Santa Maria. The officer on duty disobeyed a cardinal rule and turned the helm over to one of the ship's boys. And the boy, inexperienced in handling a ship, allowed it to drift onto a coral reef. Then, to complicate matters, instead of working to save the ship, some of Columbus's men tried to escape the vessel by rowing a small boat to the Niña. The captain of the Niña sent them back, but by then it was too late. The Santa Maria was grounded on the reef. The following day, with the help of a local Indian chief, his men, and their large canoes, Columbus salvaged everything on the ship, including the timbers. These he used to build a fort, which he named La Navidad. Columbus left 39 men at the fort with strict instructions to be extremely respectful of the Indians. Columbus at this point was reduced to just 1 ship. On November 21, Martin Pinzon, the captain of the Pinta, has sailed away, probably in search of gold. It wasn't until January 6 that Columbus again met up with Pinzon. Pinzon apologized and claimed he was blown off course. Columbus did not believe him. He decided to ignore his behavior for the good of the mission. On January 16, 1493, the Pinta and the Niña sailed back to Spain. On the way back, they ran into a furious storm. The ships were separated by high winds and huge waves. Despite prayers and choosing lots to make pilgrimages to the shrine of the Blessed Virgin, Columbus believed his ship, the Niña, would probably go down. But the Niña came ashore in Portugal, and there Columbus met with King John. Columbus reported in his log that the king received him graciously. However, court historians later said that the king was secretly seething with anger at Columbus's discovery. And some of the king's courtiers wanted to kill Columbus, but the king forbade it. Columbus finally returned to Palos on March 15, 1493. He sent word of his arrival to Ferdinand and Isabella, who received him in court with great pomp. Martin Pinzon returned about the same time. He also sent a message to the sovereigns and offered to give a full report of the discovery. The king and queen deferred to Columbus and refused him entry to the court. Pinzon, weakened by the voyage and distressed by the royal rejection, died of a fever a few days later. Columbus gave the sovereigns a small quantity of gold and some green parrots that he brought back from the Indies. He also presented a number of Indians to the sovereigns. Ferdinand and Isabella were so pleased with Columbus that they let him sit next to them, a rare honor. The triumphant welcome given him by the entire nation was the apex of his career. The crown reconfirmed his titles and honors. Ferdinand and Isabella ordered Columbus to plan a second expedition to the Indies. After that, his career declined dramatically. Columbus made 3 more voyages to the Indies. During the second voyage, 1493 to 1496, he established a colony in Hispaniola and discovered other islands, including Jamaica. During the third voyage, 1498 to 1500, he discovered South America. He landed in Venezuela near the mouth of the Orinoco River. He concluded from the size of the river that he had discovered a new continent. However, during the third voyage, Columbus's administration in Hispaniola collapsed. He was faced with rebellion and finally arrested and sent back to Spain in chains. He was exonerated by the sovereigns but lost his right to govern the lands he had discovered. During the fourth voyage, 1502 to 1504, Columbus looked for a strait leading to the Indian Ocean. His voyage brought him to Panama, where such a strait, the Panama Canal, was built in the 20th century. Columbus died in Valladolid, Spain, on May 20th, 1506. He was wealthy and surrounded by his family, but in Spain he was a forgotten man. But wait a minute. What's wrong with this story? Let's stop and examine the standard biography. It has so many implausibilities. It just does not make sense. Starting with a rags to riches, wool carder to admiral story. It portrays Columbus as a barely educated, lower middle class Genoese wool worker. He was so embarrassed about his humble origins that he never mentioned them. Yet he married into one of the most prestigious, noble families in Portugal at a time when marriage across class lines was just not done. He mingled easily with the elites of his day, dukes, ecclesiastics, nobles, and kings. And then even though he was a foreigner, he was incorporated into the Spanish nobility. Not only that, he demanded and got the extraordinary offices of admiral and viceroy. Amazingly, or curiously, he used geographic information that was known in his day to be faulty, to sail directly to a series of islands more than 4,600 miles from Spain that no one had ever been to before. And he found them, exactly where he expected to find land, except that he thought he had arrived in the Indies, or did he? Using this trajectory, wool worker to admiral, as the basis for a character analysis, biographers and critics have often concluded that Columbus was the ultimate social climber. At the very least, he was proud, greedy, and arrogant. But the evidence that supports much of the standard biography is weak. For example, the claim that Columbus was Genoese is tenuous at best. There is no doubt that there was a Cristoforo Colombo who was born in Genoa in 1451 and whose father was a wool carder. It is not at all clear that Colombo, the Genoese wool worker, and Cristobal Colon, as the discoverer was known in Spain, were the same person. According to Dr. Charles Merrill, a linguist at Mount St. Mary's College and a Columbus scholar, Columbus never said that he was Genoese. If the document in which Columbus established a trust for his heirs is genuine, he said so only once. He always wrote in Spanish or Latin, never in Italian, standard or dialectical, except for 2 short and problematic notes. He was never called Genoese or Italian by Ferdinand or Isabella, or in any official documents issued by the Castilian or Aragonese chanceries. His brother Diego was naturalized as Castilian, but wasn't called Genoese in the naturalization papers. Columbus never signed his own name and never mentioned his father or mother. In fact, as Fernando noted, he deliberately chose to leave in obscurity all that related to his birthplace and family. If he ever had to sign his name, he had a little set of hieroglyphs that he would pen that nobody could decipher. The city of Genoa didn't seem to regard him as a citizen, and his son Fernando found no relatives there on trips he made after 1506. He signed letters and documents as the Admiral, as Christoferens, the Christ-bearer, or he used a pyramid-shaped grouping of initials. From what historians have been able to gather about the early life of a man called Cristobal Colon, many details of his life do not match Genoese documents about a Cristoforo Colombo born in 1451. Merrill continues, and his first biographers, even those who knew him or his family, were quite vague when they wrote about his early life, as if they didn't know much about it, or knew more than they wanted to tell. The definitive proof that ties Colombo the wool worker to Colon the discoverer is a document drawn up by 3 young men of Genoa named Colombo. Morrison said that they were the discoverer's cousins. One of the 3 was known by the Genoese equivalent of Johnny. According to Morrison, Johnny, like Christopher, gave up a humdrum occupation to follow the sea. In 1496, the 3 brothers met in a notary's office at Genoa and agreed that Johnny should go to Spain and seek out his first cousin, Don Cristoforo Colombo, Admiral of the King of Spain, each contributing 1/3 of the traveler's expenses. This quest for a job was highly successful. The Admiral gave Johnny command of a caravel on the 3rd voyage to America and entrusted him with confidential matters as well. Scholars have generally accepted the authenticity of this document. For example, Felipe Fernandez Armesto, author of a respected 1991 volume called Columbus, said the document in question is one of unimpeachable authenticity. Fernandez Armesto goes on to say, this fact helps to convey a sense of the social trajectory of Columbus's life, the restrictive circle into which he was born and the clinging brood which surrounded him, the escape into worldly success, the clustering of kinsmen around the fortunate Arivistae, the role of the family provider to which he was committed by his hard-won place in the acceptance world. While the document may be authentic, it does not prove the discoverer came from Genoa. Dr. Merrill argues that the document does not establish that Johnny was related to the Admiral. Merrill says, the document doesn't say, as sometimes the summaries of it do, that they were going to see their cousin, Christopher Columbus. In fact, they didn't say anything about being any relationship to him at all. And there's no indication that Johnny ever went to Spain or that he was ever successful. It's just a supposition that Johnny, the captain of the caravel, was the same person that the document was talking about. If you want to be remembered in history, you better write down your story. Otherwise, no one will be able to figure out who you really were. In Spain, Columbus was called Colon. That name is not the natural Spanish equivalent of the Genoese Colombo. But even if the discoverer's name was Colombo, that in itself would not necessarily link him to Johnny. Colombo was a common Genoese name. Merrill says Colombo was the most common name in Genoa, like Smith or Jones in the United States. Colombo was the name they used to give to foundlings. Babies they found on doorsteps that had no names got the name Colombo. There's also a question whether the discoverer and the wool worker were born at the same time. From notarized documents, scholars have concluded that the wool worker was born in 1451. If Columbus was born in 1451, he would have been 41 when he made his first voyage of discovery. Working backwards, he would have been 33 or 34 when he arrived in Spain. By that time, he had already become an extraordinary mariner, a merchant engaged in international commerce, a bookseller, and a map maker. Although he had rudimentary education, he found time to do a good deal of reading. He also found time to marry, have a child, and hobnob with the Portuguese nobility. And he did it all without the aid of a fax machine. It's unlikely, although perhaps not impossible, that he did all those things before he turned 35, especially since the Colombo who was born in 1451 still described himself as a wool worker at age 21. There is evidence to show that Columbus was born earlier than 1451. For example, André Bernaldez, a friend of Columbus and a historian, said that Columbus was about 70 when he died in 1506. If that is true, Columbus was born in 1436. Now let's look at Columbus as a social climber. Much of the discussion about Columbus's character is based on his rise from the humble origins to the Spanish nobility. He married Felipa Moniz, a Portuguese noblewoman, a move that has been viewed as opportunistic. This marriage has always caused problems for historians. In the 15th century, it was unusual for a poor commoner to marry into a noble family. Most historians have tried to explain this implausible match by arguing that Felipe Moniz was able to marry a commoner because her family had fallen on hard times. As William and Carla Phillips explain, most historians present the marriage of Columbus to Felipe Moniz as a match between an ambitious but penniless young man and the impoverished daughter of a noble family down on its luck. Some historians have even suggested that Felipa was available for marriage to a commoner because she was homely. But there is no record of Felipa's physical appearance. But we do know that her family was neither disgraced nor impoverished. In fact, it had strong connections to the Portuguese court and was, in the words of one scholar, as noble as you can get. And according to William and Carla Phillips, Columbus was not a penniless commoner. They wrote, Columbus presumably had achieved some wealth and distinction of his own, or he would not have been able to make such a favorable match. But if Columbus was not the son of a Genoese wool carder, did his family already have wealth and distinction? His interactions with Ferdinand and Isabella suggest that they did. Dr. Merrill says that it is unlikely that the sovereigns would have given him the privileges that they did if they had known he was from a poor family. And it is not likely that Columbus could have kept his origins from them. As Merrill points out, Ferdinand and Isabella were astute. They had a network of spies all over Europe. They could have and would have found out if he was, in fact, of a Genoese family. When the sovereigns gave Columbus a coat of arms as a newly created nobleman, they gave him the singular honor of incorporating the royal symbols of Castile and Leon on his coat of arms. They simply would not have done that if he were of humble birth. But in 1493, the sovereigns wrote Columbus a letter confirming his nobility and giving him the right to use the royal insignia along with your own arms, which you are accustomed to bear. That last phrase is in quotes. In other words, Columbus already had his own coat of arms, something no Genoese commoner would have had. Only the nobility had coats of arms. Scholars have tried to diminish the importance of this fact by arguing that Columbus used the coat of arms of the Genoese Weavers' Guild. But that argument is unconvincing, especially since Ferdinand and Isabella authorized Columbus to use his own arms and not the arms of the Guild. Specifically, that is what they wrote in the letter, to use his own arms. What's more, Columbus seemed to have a close relationship with Isabella. Although he was on the royal payroll, it was never clear just what Columbus did for the Castilian monarchy. Another secret that he never told. A bookkeeping entry by a royal accounting clerk shows that he gave money to Christopher Columbus, foreigner, who is here on Her Majesty's secret service. That did not mean that Columbus was a spy. It meant that what he was doing on behalf of the Queen was a royal secret.